Hook an engaging introduction. A quiet rain is tapping the slate roof of Clarence's house when a young woman leans over her canvases, wiping a smudge of ultramarine from her thumb. The corridor outside echoes with footmen arranging silver for dinner, but in this bright attic studio, no one calls her Your Royal Highness. Her friends simply call her Patricia. Tonight she is mixing pigments for a storm-tossed seascape, her mind drifting far from the ballrooms, the headlines, the suffocating thrones that have tried to claim her future. She is 28, vibrant and unafraid of scandal. She is in her late 20s, vibrant and unafraid of scandal. Within 2 years, she will walk into Westminster Abbey a princess and walk out as Mrs. Ramsay, the first British royal of her rank to surrender a title by choice rather than duty. If you have never heard that story, or have only caught it in passing, settle in. Over the next half hour, we are going to step through a door most biographies leave half open, breathe the paint-stained air of that attic, and watch a crown rolled up like a discarded sketch and tucked into a drawer marked freedom. Britain at the dawn of the 20th century is, on paper, an empire of certainties. But beneath the brass bands and balcony waves, the ground is shifting. Newspapers spit out daily editions. Faster than a duchess can change hats. The suffrage movement is marching ever closer to Westminster, and the Great War is still an ominous rumor on the horizon. It is into this world, both glittering and brittle, that Victoria Patricia Helena Elizabeth is born on the 17th of March, 1886, in a guest suite of Buckingham Palace hung with orange blossoms to celebrate spring. Childhood and upbringing. As the newest member of the British royal family, Victoria Patricia Helena Elizabeth, often known simply as Patricia, entered a lineage steeped in history and interconnected with Europe's monarchies. She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, the long-reigning sovereign whose era defined the Victorian age and whose descendants populated thrones across the continent. Patricia's father was Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Strathearn, a dedicated military man and the third son of Queen Victoria, while her mother was Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia, adding German royal blood to the mix. This made Patricia a direct link in a vast chain of royal ancestry that extended through nearly every major European court, from Britain to Russia, Germany, and beyond. From birth, her existence carried diplomatic significance, positioning her as a potential pawn in the intricate game of international alliances and marriages that royals often navigated. Her cradle itself symbolized this role, as she was seen not just as a child, but as a future asset in forging ties between nations. Even her earliest experiences reflected this multilingual and multicultural heritage. Her first lullabies were sung in at least 3 languages, English, German, and possibly French, mirroring the diverse influences within her family. From the moment she took her initial steps, court correspondents and society gossips began speculating on her future, placing informal bets on which foreign crown or princely title she might one day claim through marriage or inheritance. Patricia's childhood was far from the sedentary life one might expect of a royal princess confined to palace walls. Instead, it was marked by constant movement and exposure to the wider world, largely due to her father's military career. While she was still a young child dressed in nursery frocks, Prince Arthur was posted to India as part of his duties in the British Army, serving in various command roles within the colonial administration. The family relocated accordingly, spending several formative years in the subcontinent. During the intense monsoon seasons, they resided in the hill station of Simla, now Shimla, a popular retreat for British officials seeking respite from the lowland heat. Here, Patricia formed unlikely friendships with the children of Sikh officers in her father's regiment, playing games and sharing stories that bridged cultural divides. These interactions introduced her to elements of Indian life, from traditional attire to local customs, fostering an early sense of curiosity and openness. In her spare time, she took up sketching, filling her exercise books with detailed drawings of the majestic Himalayan peaks that surrounded Simla, capturing the snow-capped mountains, lush valleys, and dramatic landscapes that left a lasting impression on her young mind. This period abroad not only broadened her worldview, but also instilled a resilience to adapt to new environments, setting the tone for her nomadic early life. By the age of 9, Patricia's adventures continued with a transcontinental journey across Canada, a dominion of the British Empire where her father would later serve as Governor General. The family traveled by rail, traversing vast stretches of wilderness and urban centers alike, an experience that exposed her to the raw beauty and diversity of North America. As the train chugged through remote areas, Patricia would wave enthusiastically to workers at lumber camps visible in the early dawn light, her youthful energy drawing smiles from the rugged loggers. She bombarded the train conductor with endless questions about local wildlife, particularly fascinated by stories of wolves prowling the forests, which sparked her imagination and deepened her interest in natural history. Upon arriving in Ottawa, the Canadian capital, Patricia embraced the winter activities with gusto. She learned to skate on the frozen Rideau Canal, gliding across the ice with a mix of grace and determination, often under the watchful eyes of her family and attendants. Her attempts at using snowshoes, clumsy at first, left her laughing breathlessly as she navigated the snowy terrain, turning potential mishaps into joyful memories. Throughout these experiences, Patricia's unfiltered honesty and approachable demeanor charmed the reporters who followed the royal family's progress. Unlike many royals who maintained a stiff, reserved public persona, she spoke candidly, answering questions with genuine enthusiasm and wit, which endeared her to the press and the public alike, and hinted at the independent spirit she would carry into adulthood. Edwardian aura. As Princess Patricia entered her teenage years and transitioned into young adulthood during the Edwardian era, spanning from 1901 to 1910, following the death of Queen Victoria and the ascension of King Edward VII, she began to attract significant attention from the European aristocracy and the public alike. This period was characterized by a fascination with royal alliances, where marriages between noble houses were often strategic tools for diplomacy, strengthening ties between nations amid growing international tensions. Patricia, with her impeccable lineage as the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and her poised demeanor honed from a worldly childhood, quickly emerged as one of the most sought-after figures in royal circles. Contemporary gossip columns in newspapers and society magazines, which thrived on the era's blend of opulence and intrigue, featured her almost weekly. She was frequently dubbed the most eligible princess in Europe, a title that underscored her beauty, intelligence, and connections, making her a prime candidate for high-profile unions that could reshape dynastic landscapes. The Edwardian press, fueled by the rapid expansion of tabloid journalism and the public's insatiable appetite for royal scandals and speculations, generated a steady stream of rumors about Patricia's potential suitors. These stories circulated widely across Europe, often crossing the English Channel via telegraph wires, and steamer ships carrying the latest editions of continental newspapers. One prominent rumor, appearing in various publications, envisioned her ascending to the throne of Spain as the consort of King Alfonso XIII, a young monarch whose reign was marked by political instability and who was actively seeking a suitable bride to bolster his position. Another persistent claim suggested she would marry Manuel II of Portugal, a charismatic but controversy-plagued king known for his dashing lifestyle and involvement in scandals that included romantic entanglements and financial woes. The press speculated that Patricia's steady influence could tame him and stabilize the Portuguese monarchy. Beyond these Iberian connections, the rumors extended to a diverse array of European nobility: Russian Grand Dukes from the Romanov family, heirs to the Swedish crown with their Nordic Protestant heritage, and even an exiled pretender to the Serbian throne, whose claims added an element of intrigue and uncertainty. Every few months, a fresh wave of these speculations would emerge, driven by anonymous sources, diplomatic whispers, or mere journalistic invention, keeping Patricia's name in the headlines and fueling betting pools among society elites. Amid the whirlwind of matrimonial gossip, Princess Patricia maintained a remarkably composed and independent stance, choosing to focus on her personal interests rather than engaging with the rumors. While the press buzzed with predictions of grand weddings and coronations, she continued her private pursuits with quiet determination, often evading the spotlight that accompanied her status. She dedicated time to her artistic hobbies, such as painting detailed landscapes and portraits inspired by her travels, which provided a creative outlet and a sense of personal fulfillment away from public scrutiny. Similarly, she persisted with physical activities like skating, a skill she had honed during her Canadian winters, using it as a way to enjoy solitude or small gatherings with trusted friends. To dodge persistent journalists who staked out royal residences hoping for a scoop, Patricia developed clever tactics for discretion, such as slipping out through servants' entrances disguised in everyday attire, including a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her face to obscure her identity. This elusive behavior only added to her mystique, but it also highlighted her desire for autonomy. When directly questioned about her future prospects, perhaps during family gatherings or informal conversations, she reportedly expressed her preferences with candid wit. In one alleged exchange with an aunt, she remarked, "I should like my own front door more than 1,000 footmen," a statement that encapsulated her yearning for a simpler, self-directed life over the pomp and servitude of a high-ranking royal marriage, reflecting an emerging modern sensibility in an era still bound by tradition. World War I and changing fates. World War I broke out in August 1914, triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and the subsequent cascade of alliances that drew major European powers into conflict. Almost overnight, the frivolous and enchanting glamour of Edwardian court life, once filled with elaborate balls, diplomatic receptions, and social frivolities, akin to the sweetness of cotton candy, lost all its appeal, turning instead into something bland and unpalatable, like the taste of chalk. This dramatic shift reflected the broader societal transformation, as the optimism of the pre-war era gave way to the grim realities of mobilization, rationing, and widespread anxiety. The British Empire, previously basking in its imperial confidence, now faced the harsh demands of total war, with young men enlisting en masse and families bracing for separation and loss. For the royal family and aristocracy, the change was particularly stark, as their insulated world of privilege collided with the urgent needs of a nation at arms. By the time war began, Princess Patricia was 28 years old, an age where many women of her status might have been settled into marriage or domestic roles. But her independent spirit had kept her unmarried amid earlier rumors. The conflict deeply affected her immediate family circle, heightening her sense of personal turmoil and duty. Her brother, Prince Arthur of Connaught, was deployed to the Western Front, where brutal trench warfare and artillery barrages defined the fighting in places like France and Belgium, exposing him to constant danger. Adding to the emotional strain, her extended family was fractured by the war's alliances. Cousins from various European branches found themselves on opposing sides, with some fighting for Britain and its allies, while others served in the German or Austrian forces, turning familial bonds into sources of divided loyalties and heartache. In this context, the persistent wedding rumors that had once swirled around her, linking her to various European royals, now seemed utterly grotesque and out of place, overshadowed by the gravity of global catastrophe and the inappropriateness of celebrating unions amid widespread suffering and death. Driven by a restless energy and a desire to contribute meaningfully to the war cause, Princess Patricia channeled her efforts into supporting the wounded and the military infrastructure, stepping away from the remnants of courtly life to engage directly with the hardships of the conflict. She volunteered extensively in hospitals, where the influx of injured soldiers from the front lines created overwhelming demands for care. Her presence provided not only practical assistance, but also moral support to the medical staff and patients enduring amputations, infections, and shell shock. Among her specific tasks, she spent afternoons meticulously copying soldiers' last letters, poignant final messages written to loved ones, often stained with blood from the battlefield, so that the originals could remain with the men who had carried them as cherished keepsakes, preserving their personal significance while ensuring the contents reached families back home. This act of quiet compassion highlighted her empathy and attention to the human cost of war, as she handled these documents with care, transcribing words of farewell, love, and regret that captured the soldiers' final thoughts. As part of her broader involvement in boosting military morale, Princess Patricia made notable visits to training camps, including those of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, a regiment raised in Canada and named in her honor as a tribute to her earlier time in the country. During one such visit to the PPCLI training camp, she participated in ceremonial activities that forged a strong bond with the troops. The recruits, a mix of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, united by their commitment to the Allied cause, greeted her with enthusiastic roars of her name, their cheers echoing across the parade grounds as a sign of admiration and loyalty. In a symbolic gesture, Patricia lifted the regiment's homemade silk standard, a flag crafted by supporters back in Canada, embroidered with intricate designs and colors representing national pride. For the first time, an act that inspired the soldiers and cemented her role as their patroness. This event not only elevated the regiment's spirits ahead of their deployment, but also underscored Patricia's ability to connect with ordinary people in extraordinary times, using her royal status to foster unity and resolve. Encounters and love in wartime. One evening, following her activities at a military site, Princess Patricia was walking back through the rain-soaked and muddy fields toward the officers' mess, navigating the uneven terrain typical of wartime encampments, where paths were often churned into quagmires by constant foot traffic and vehicles. In a moment of misfortune, she accidentally stepped on a broken horseshoe discarded in the path, causing her to lose her balance and go sprawling face first into the mud, soiling her clothing and leaving her momentarily stunned and embarrassed. A young naval aide nearby quickly came to her assistance, kneeling down to help her regain her footing amid the slippery ground. This officer was Alexander Ramsey, a gunnery specialist in the Royal Navy who had recently been decorated for his acts of heroism during the Battle of Heligoland Bight in August 1914, an early naval engagement where British forces ambushed German patrols, and his bravery under fire had earned him recognition and medals. Extending his arm to steady her, Ramsay offered polite support, which Patricia accepted as she brushed off the mud and composed herself. What began as a simple exchange about her twisted ankle, perhaps discussing the pain, the need for medical attention, or the hazards of the terrain, unexpectedly evolved into a deeper conversation that neither could fully articulate even years later. Through shared words, glances, and perhaps mutual recognition of kindred spirits forged in the war's chaos, they both sensed an immediate and profound shift, realizing that their lives had irrevocably changed course in that serendipitous moment, laying the foundation for a future together. Love stories involving princesses have historically been fraught with obstacles, often entangled in matters of protocol, social hierarchy, and dynastic expectations. And the romance between Princess Patricia and Alexander Ramsay proved to be no exception to this pattern. Alexander Ramsay, born as the third son of the 13th Earl of Dalhousie, held the courtesy title of the Honorable, due to his father's peerage, but he was emphatically not of royal blood himself, lacking the elevated status that would typically make him a suitable match for a princess in the eyes of the British court. Despite this disparity, their initial encounter during World War I blossomed into a deep friendship over the course of 6 years, from 1914 to 1920, as they navigated the uncertainties of wartime and its aftermath. This period saw them corresponding regularly, sharing experiences from their respective duties, Patricia in her volunteer work and Ramsay in his naval postings, and gradually building a bond based on mutual respect, shared values, and affection. However, as their connection deepened, it began to alarm the courtiers and advisors surrounding the royal family, who viewed the match as unconventional and potentially disruptive to established norms. King George V, Patricia's first cousin once removed, and the reigning monarch, personally liked Ramsay for his distinguished naval career, including his heroism in battles like Heligoland Bight and his honorable character, but he harbored significant concerns about setting a precedent that could undermine the rigid structures of royal marriages, fearing it might encourage similar unions that blurred the lines between royalty and nobility. Encounters and love in wartime. The impasse in their relationship persisted until Princess Patricia took matters into her own hands, demonstrating her characteristic independence and resolve to break free from traditional constraints. On Christmas Eve 1918, just weeks after the armistice that ended World War I on November 11, 1918, and amid the festive yet reflective atmosphere of the holiday season, she requested a private audience with King George V at Buckingham Palace, or one of the royal residences. During this meeting, Patricia calmly and directly declared her intention to marry Commander Alexander Ramsay, who by then had risen in rank through his wartime service in the Royal Navy. She further stipulated that she would not accept any elevation of his status, such as granting him a royal title or peerage, to make the union more palatable to the court, emphasizing that their marriage should stand on its own merits without artificial enhancements. Most shockingly, she announced her willingness to relinquish her own royal style and title of Her Royal Highness, a privilege she had held since birth as a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, effectively choosing personal happiness over the trappings of royalty. This 15-minute conversation, conducted with poise and determination on Patricia's part, overturned centuries of dynastic tradition that had governed royal marriages, where unions were typically arranged to preserve or enhance bloodlines, alliances, and hierarchies, marking a rare instance of a royal voluntarily stepping down in status for love. Following Patricia's audience with the king, and after careful consideration within the royal household, the decision was formalized through official channels to ensure legal and procedural clarity. A royal warrant, dated February 25, 1919, was issued by King George V, documenting the transformation with the characteristic brevity and formality of bureaucratic language, typical of such decrees. This document officially sanctioned Patricia's relinquishment of her royal titles and styles, allowing her to be known henceforth simply as Lady Patricia Ramsay upon her marriage, without the Royal Highness's prefix or other regal designations. The warrant represented a significant departure from precedent, as it acknowledged a member's voluntary exit from the inner circle of royalty, influenced by the post-war mood of change and the king's reluctant but eventual approval. This step not only cleared the path for the wedding, but also set a subtle example for future royals, though at the time it was handled discreetly to minimize public controversy or emulation. The culmination of these events occurred on February 27, 1919, when the wedding took place at the historic Westminster Abbey in London, a venue steeped in royal significance where coronations and state ceremonies had been held for centuries. At 11:30 in the morning, the abbey fell into a hushed silence as guests, including members of the royal family, nobility, and military figures, awaited the bride's entrance. Princess Patricia, now on the verge of her title change, walked up the long nave on the arm of her father, Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, who had served as a steadfast figure in her life through travels in wartime. Her attire reflected her preference for simplicity over ostentation. She wore a plain satin gown, elegant in its understatement, paired with a bandeau headpiece adorned with white wings, symbolizing purity and new beginnings, deliberately eschewing the heavy diamonds, jeweled tiaras, or royal orders that were customary for princesses on their wedding day. During the ceremony conducted by the Dean of Westminster, a pivotal moment arose when he formally asked for her name as part of the vows. Patricia responded clearly with Patricia Ramsay, omitting any royal prefixes, which signified her immediate embrace of her new identity. Newspapers reporting on the event later claimed that an audible gasp rippled through the choir and assembled guests, a collective reaction of surprise and perhaps admiration at the boldness of her choice in such a public and sacred setting. Immediately following the ceremony, the newlyweds, now officially Commander and Lady Patricia Ramsay, departed Westminster Abbey in a carriage or motor car, driving away to a reception held at a suitable venue, likely one of the royal palaces or a family estate where friends, family, and dignitaries gathered to celebrate. The atmosphere at the reception was a mix of joy and subtle confusion, as the sudden shift in Patricia's status disrupted long ingrained habits of courtly etiquette. Servants and attendants, trained to show deference to royalty, instinctively began bowing or curtsying upon her approach, only to half stop midway, realizing that protocol had now lost its compass with her relinquished title, no longer requiring the full obeisance reserved for a royal highness. This awkward adjustment highlighted the broader implications of the marriage as guests navigated the new dynamics, toasting the couple while whispering about the precedent set. The event marked not just a personal milestone for Patricia and Alexander, but a quiet evolution in royal customs influencing how future generations might balance love and duty. Family and Rural Life, 1919 to 1939, following her marriage in February 1919 and the voluntary relinquishment of her royal titles, Lady Patricia Ramsay embarked on a new chapter that spanned the next 5 decades, from 1919 until her death in 1974. During this extended period, society and the public repeatedly attempted, but ultimately failed, to categorize her neatly into a predefined social role. No longer fully embraced as royalty due to her deliberate step away from the Royal Highness designation, yet far from being an ordinary commoner given her aristocratic background and connections, she existed as a unique hybrid figure, a living embodiment of the hyphen between two worlds. This ambiguous status allowed her a degree of freedom uncommon for women of her era, enabling her to pursue a life marked by personal independence, quiet philanthropy, and unconventional behaviors that often defied expectations. Her days were filled with a blend of domestic responsibilities, creative endeavors, and public engagements, all conducted on her own terms, reflecting the independent spirit she had cultivated since childhood. Shortly after their wedding, the Ramsays welcomed their only child, Alexander Ramsay, of Mar, who was born just before Christmas in December 1919, adding a layer of joy and family focus to their early married life amid the post-World War I recovery. Alistair's arrival came at a time when the couple was settling into their new roles outside the strictures of royal protocol, allowing them to raise him in a relatively private and nurturing environment. As he grew, Alistair would face significant challenges, including serving in World War II, where he lost a leg during combat operations in Normandy, a grievous injury that tested the family's resilience but also highlighted their enduring bonds. Later in life, Alistair married Lady Saltoun, the heiress to one of Scotland's oldest peerages, thereby reintroducing ancient Scottish titles and noble lineages back into the family bloodline, a poignant irony given that his mother had once renounced her own grandeur for love. This union not only preserved historical ties, but also symbolized a quiet restoration of heritage through the next generation. In the years immediately following their marriage, Alexander Ramsay resumed his distinguished career in the Royal Navy, building on his pre-war and wartime experiences as a gunnery officer. He served in various postings during the interwar period, contributing to naval operations and training amid the shifting geopolitical landscape of the 1920s and 1930s. However, his active service came to an end when a serious injury, likely sustained during duty or exercises, forced him to retire, a decision influenced by the need to prioritize his health and family life. Upon retirement, Alexander transitioned to a more sedentary existence, channeling his energies into domestic and recreational pursuits that supported his wife's well-being and their shared home. He took up gardening, planting Douglas fir seedlings in their grounds, which have grown into sturdy trees symbolizing stability and growth in their post-naval life. Additionally, he memorized an array of bird calls, using them to entertain and comfort Patricia during her bouts of insomnia, mimicking the sounds with accuracy to elicit laughter and provide distraction in the quiet hours of the night, showcasing his attentive and affectionate nature as a husband. For the first 17 years of her married life, from 1919 until approximately 1936, Lady Patricia resided at Clarence House in London, a prestigious royal residence that had been associated with her family. This period was largely dedicated to caring for her elderly father, Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, who was in his later years and required attentive nursing due to advancing age and health issues stemming from his long military career and the strains of widowhood after her mother's death in 1917. Patricia's role as caregiver involved managing his daily needs, overseeing medical care, and providing companionship, all while balancing her own family responsibilities with Alexander and young Alistair. Living at Clarence House during this time allowed her to maintain some proximity to royal circles without fully participating in them, but it also underscored her commitment to familial duty as she prioritized her father's comfort in a setting familiar to him from his own royal past. After the 17 years at Clarence House, likely around 1936 as her father's needs evolved or following a family decision for change, Lady Patricia and her family relocated to a more rural home in Surrey, a county south of London known for its picturesque countryside and quieter pace of life. This new residence became a personal sanctuary, lined with beehives that buzzed with activity, reflecting her interest in beekeeping and perhaps a nod to sustainable living or a hobby that provided both relaxation and a sense of productivity. The home was also filled with easels set up in sunlit rooms, where she pursued her lifelong passion for painting, creating artworks inspired by nature travels and personal reflections. This move marked a shift toward greater privacy and self-sufficiency, allowing the Ramsays to cultivate a lifestyle away from urban scrutiny, surrounded by gardens, woodlands, and the simple pleasures of country living. Throughout her decades as Lady Patricia, she engaged in various philanthropic activities that leveraged her talents and public profile for good causes, often in understated ways that aligned with her independent ethos. One notable effort involved auctioning her own paintings, with the proceeds directed toward funding maternity wards in hospitals, thereby supporting maternal health and infant care at a time when medical advancements were improving but resources were still limited. Her commitment extended to her enduring patronage of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the regiment named in her honor. She would make unannounced appearances at their reunions, surprising veterans by joining them in camaraderie, including drinking beer from dented mess tins that evoked wartime memories and fostered a sense of shared history and loyalty. Lady Patricia's life was punctuated by moments of whimsy and defiance against convention, illustrating her refusal to be boxed into societal norms. In one memorable incident that captured her spirited nature, she scandalized a London policeman by parking her tiny Austin 7, a compact economical car popular in the interwar years, at a bus stop, allowing her to quickly dash into Liberty's department store on Regent Street to purchase a roll of Japanese silk, likely for one of her artistic projects or home decorations. This act of minor rebellion, prioritizing convenience over strict rules, highlighted her practical and unpretentious approach to life, endearing her to those who appreciated her authenticity while occasionally raising eyebrows among more rigid observers. Amid the broader narrative of her life, photographs from the family archives capture tender, intimate moments that reveal the depth of her relationships and passions. One such series shows Lady Patricia and her son Alistair fishing together on serene waters, perhaps during holidays or weekends in the countryside. In these images, she is depicted sketching the clouds as they mirror on the lake's surface, her artistic tools in hand, while a bare foot dangles casually from the boat, symbolizing relaxation and a connection to nature. These snapshots encapsulate the blend of creativity, family bonding, and simple joys that defined her private world, underscoring how her service to others was balanced by personal fulfillment and the enduring love within her immediate circle. Royal aftermath and rumor. In the years following her 1919 marriage and the relinquishment of her royal titles, Lady Patricia Ramsay faced a mix of personal affirmation and external backlash that shaped public and familial perceptions of her choice. Questions arose about whether she ever regretted stepping away from royalty, But a letter discovered decades later, written in her own hand, provided a clear and poetic rebuttal. If freedom has a crest, it is light enough to wear without strain. This correspondence underscored her contentment with the lighter burdens of her new life, emphasizing the value she placed on personal autonomy over the weight of dynastic obligations. However, not all reactions were supportive. Some members of her extended royal family distanced themselves, viewing her decision as a breach of tradition. A particularly harsh letter from a German cousin accused her of having soiled the ermine, a metaphorical reference to tarnishing the purity and prestige associated with royal heraldry and fur-trimmed robes, symbolizing a perceived degradation of the family's noble standing. This familial freeze-out manifested in social slights, such as court invitations arriving late or not at all, effectively marginalizing her from certain inner circle events and gatherings that she might have previously attended as a matter of course. Amid the familial tensions, rumors circulated in society and the press about the repercussions of Lady Patricia's marriage, further complicating her public perception during the interwar period. One persistent whisper suggested that King George V, despite his initial approval, had privately requested she avoid attending services at Windsor Chapel for a full year, ostensibly to allow time for the court to adjust to the precedent and to minimize any awkwardness in royal religious observances. These speculations, whether grounded in fact or exaggeration, contributed to a narrative of subtle exile, portraying her as an outlier in the rigidly structured world of monarchy. Lady Patricia, true to her independent nature, never publicly commented on these rumors or the slights she endured, maintaining a dignified silence that spoke volumes about her character. Instead, she channeled her energies elsewhere, as noted in a brief entry in her diary. "I painted violets instead." This simple statement reflected her preference for creative pursuits, such as rendering delicate floral studies in watercolors or oils, as a form of quiet rebellion and personal solace, turning potential bitterness into productive artistry rather than engaging in defensive commentary. Contributions. During World War II, as World War II unfolded from 1939 to 1945, Lady Patricia, who turned 60 in 1946 but was in her late 50s during the conflict's peak, demonstrated unwavering resolve by refusing to slow down despite her age and the wartime hardships faced by Britain. She actively participated in civilian support efforts through the Surrey Women's Voluntary Service, an organization that mobilized women for essential home front tasks. Among her duties, she drove lorries loaded with scrap metal, collecting and transporting materials from households and factories to recycling centers, where they were repurposed for munitions and aircraft production, contributing directly to the war economy amid shortages and rationing. Additionally, she hosted Canadian soldiers on leave at her Surrey home, providing them with respite, home-cooked meals, and a touch of familiarity far from their North American roots, often drawing on her own fond memories of Canada from childhood travels. In quieter moments, she was spotted at dawn on the back steps of her residence, smoking a cigarette while humming a Nova Scotia lullaby she had learned decades earlier during her time in Ottawa and other Canadian locales, a nostalgic ritual that blended personal reflection with the endurance required during air raids and blackouts, public visibility in the post-war era, and the 1953 coronation. In the late years following World War II, particularly from the 1950s onward, the advent of television brought royal pomp and ceremonies directly into ordinary sitting rooms across Britain, transforming public engagement with the monarchy. cameras frequently captured Lady Patricia's half-familiar face on the fringes of these events, where her presence as a former princess added a layer of intrigue without her being at the center stage. She consistently refused interview requests from journalists and broadcasters, maintaining her privacy even as media interest grew in the era of televised spectacles. However, during a rehearsal for the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, a grand affair symbolizing post-war renewal and continuity, she was overheard making a cryptic yet profound remark: "Its burden is not what it carries, but what it cannot set down." This observation, likely referring to the crown itself or the weight of royal duty, highlighted her nuanced understanding of monarchy's demands, drawing from her own experience of voluntarily setting aside such burdens while still respecting the institution. Final years, deaths, and burial. Lady Patricia's later life was marked by personal losses and a continued emphasis on humility, culminating in the early 1970s. Her husband, Alexander Ramsay, passed away in 1972 after a long retirement filled with shared companionship, leaving her to navigate widowhood in her Surrey home surrounded by her artworks and memories. Patricia followed him in death 2 years later, in 1974, at the age of 87, having lived a life that spanned dramatic historical shifts from the Victorian era to the modern age. In accordance with their wishes, she was buried beside Alexander at Frogmore Royal Burial Ground in Windsor, a site traditionally reserved for members of the royal family and their close kin, which quietly acknowledged her enduring ties to the Windsors, despite her title change. This resting place amid the serene gardens near Windsor Castle symbolized a final reconciliation with her heritage. In her will, drafted with the same independent spirit that defined her choices, Lady Patricia left specific instructions regarding her personal artworks, ensuring her legacy remained focused on substance rather than status. She bequeathed a collection of her paintings to be sold anonymously, stipulating that buyers should acquire them for the novelty of a signature once royal be avoided. In other words, the sales were to proceed without revealing her identity as the artist, preventing any inflation of value based on her former royal connections. This directive reflected her lifelong aversion to exploiting her background for personal gain, instead allowing the works, landscapes, florals, and sketches from her travels to stand on their artistic merit alone, with proceeds likely directed toward charitable causes she had supported, such as maternity wards or military veterans. Historical significance and ongoing debates. In the decades since her death, historians have continued to debate the broader implications of Lady Patricia's actions, particularly the constitutional ripple caused by her voluntary relinquishment of royal status in 1919. Some scholars argue that she paved the way for later royal commoner marriages, such as those of Princess Margaret, or even influencing the more modern unions like that of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, by demonstrating that love could supersede rigid protocols without collapsing the monarchy. Others contend that her case was unique, influenced by the post-World War I social changes, her personal circumstances, and King George V's specific approval, making it an outlier rather than a direct precedent. What remains undeniable, however, is the emotional and symbolic precedent she set. Her choice illustrated that voluntary contraction, subtracting titles and privileges, could be a dignified act, proving that reduction in status did not equate to diminishment in character or legacy, and offering a model of graceful adaptation in an evolving world.